Economists use several measures to track the changes in cost of living over time, including the Consumer Price Index, the Producer Price Index, the Gross Domestic Product Deflator, and the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index. The most used measurement is the Consumer Price Index, which measures a fixed market basket of goods chosen to represent the consumption patterns of individuals and households. The market basket includes expenditures that most Americans consume on a regular basis, including housing, food, clothing, transportation, medical care, entertainment, and other goods and services. As a baseline, the price value of these goods and services is set at an actual cost of the market base in a given year. Prices are then compared each month to the baseline to determine if there has been a change in any or all of the market basket items. Here we have definitions to help us with our discussion of inflation. Take a minute, stop the video, and review these definitions. The reality principle distinguishes between real values and face values of income, money stores, and prices. The principle is based on the purchasing power of money or income and not on the face value. When we study inflation or deflation of prices in the economy, we compare the current prices or face value and the purchasing power of the dollar using a common base value in a given time period. This comparison uses measurements such as the Consumer Price Index to determine the inflation price. The Consumer Price Index is calculated as a cost of the market basket in the current year divided by the cost of the market basket in the selected base year and then multiplying the product by 100. While the overall inflation rate is calculated using the market basket of household goods and services, each category is assessed to determine the changes in component real costs. The inflation rate for all items increased in December 2020 by 0.4%. The overall increase over the previous 12 months was 1.4%. Food prices increased 3.9%, the largest one-year increase in food prices since the year 2011, and a much larger percent change than the 12 months of 2019, where food prices increased by 1.9%. Both inflation and deflation can cause extreme hardships on individuals and society. While deflation has not been as prevalent in recent U.S. history, it has plagued other countries such as Japan in recent decades. Consider the situation where assets are constantly declining in value. One of the determinants of supply and demand is the supplier and consumer expectations. If either consumer or supplier was certain that the asset would be worth less in a month than it is now, would you think that either would purchase an asset at a higher price today, unless it was essential to do so? You may want to research Japan's lost decade to understand the negative economic impact of deflation. Demand pull inflation is manifest when the demand for goods and services is greater than the supply of those products. Some economists describe the situation as too many dollars chasing too few goods. Cost push inflation is caused when production resources are in limited supply, and producers must bid against each other for those resources, increasing the overall cost of production, which is passed on to the consumer. So who is hurt by inflation? Anticipated versus unanticipated inflation. The effects of inflation on individuals depends upon whether the inflation was anticipated or unanticipated. When the inflationary rate is anticipated, economic players can make adjustments to their activities in an effort to avert or at least moderate an inflationary impact. If the actual inflationary rate is unexpected or is higher than expected and no action was taken to moderate these losses, one may be harmed by inflation alone. An example of anticipated inflation would be a bank that makes a loan to consumers and businesses. The real interest rate is the market rate that would be set if there were no inflation. It is the opportunity cost of money and represents a normal rate of return on the money itself. If the banker anticipates that the inflation rate for the near future would be 3%, the nominal or face value charged to customers would be 6%. If the inflation rate was actually 2%, then the banker is a winner. However, if the actual inflation rate were higher than 3%, the bank loses. The winner in the transaction is the borrower, who now will pay back the loan with relatively cheaper dollars. Segments of the economy have created hedges against inflation. Workers, especially unions in negotiating their contracts, and the large employer wishing to retain professional and well-trained staff, adjust nominal compensation values with cost of living adjustments based on inflation measures to maintain a constant employee buying power. An economy experiences periods of growth and contraction as new products are developed and introduced. Technology provides consumers with enhanced personal productivity and may replace some workers. Shortages or essential land resources have caused shocks to the economy. The financial markets and the availability of money has both contributed to economic prosperity and recessions. Political events and unexpected world conflicts have played major roles in the abundance and shortages of goods and services, all impacting the health of economies throughout the world. Over the past 3 decades, the inflation rate in the United States has been relatively low, averaging about 2 to 4% per year. The highest years of inflation have been the periods following World War I, World War II, and the period between the late 1970s and the early 1980s. From 1917 through 1920, the monthly inflation rate ranged from 12% to 23%. In 1921 and 1922, general prices actually dropped each month. Beginning in 1946, the general price level was 2.2%, and by March of 1947, the price level was 19.7%. Prices began dropping in 1948, and from May 1949 through June 1950, prices declined each month by a negative 0.4% to a negative 2.9%. In the late 1970s, the world oil prices rapidly increased as crude oil supplies were limited by the creation of the OPEC cartel. In 1978, the inflation rate was 9%. In 1979, the rate was 13.3%, and in 1980, inflation was 12.5%. The reality principle states that what really matters to people is the real value of their money and not the face value. Inflation depreciates the value of income, savings, and buying power when there is no corresponding increase in these assets and values. When inflation is 10% and your income is unchanged, you have lost buying power, and the money you have in savings is worth 90% of what it was last year, even if the face value is the same. If you received a 7% raise this year, your income in real terms has less buying power than it did last year with a 10% inflation rate. Additionally, when inflation rates are high, interest rates are most often even higher. The federal funds discount rate, the rate the Federal Reserve charges member banks for funds, in 1980 was 18%. When the cost of money is this high, mortgages and loans for business expansion are out of reach for the majority of the people in the economy. Hyperinflation is defined as extreme inflation of the general price level within a very short period of time. This chart shows the 7 worst cases of hyperinflation, which debilitates a nation's economy and renders the value of money worthless. The German mark lost so much value in post-World War I that people used the mark in furnaces for fuel and sometimes just dropped the paper money in the street rather than carrying worthless paper. Prices doubled every week with an inflation rate of 29,500%. In Zimbabwe, prices doubled every 24.7 hours with an inflation rate of over 79 billion%.